Good evening y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Alex Hernandez of Noticias Univision Chicago, which airs every weekday morning at 5 and 6. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us on the show tonight. As Republicans gain control of the House, we look at the potential future of immigration policy. Plus, hundreds of asylum seekers are now calling Chicago home. We share some of their stories. We talk with the author of a new book about Latinos' path to political power in Chicago. The Cook County Promise Guaranteed Income pilot has entered its next phase. We hear about hopes for the programs and plans to keep it going in the future. And the early beginnings of the Mexican Folkloric Dance Company of Chicago. All that coming up. But our first story tonight, immigration priorities ahead of a change in Congress. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
As the Republican Party prepares to take over the House of Representatives, Democrats in Congress are pushing to wrap their agenda in this upcoming lame duck session. One of the priorities is a bill to protect more than 600,000 so-called dreamers under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, as all of us know it. However, the path forward on larger immigration reform remains uncertain. Joining us now with more are Elena Olea, Associate Director of Programs at Alianza Americas, and Ere Rendon, Vice President of Immigrant Justice at the Resurrection Project. I want to welcome both of you for joining us today, and I want to start with you, Ere. With a change in power in the House and Senate, what do you anticipate the conversation will be around immigration policy for next session?
Well, I think we really have to look at the lame duck session, and within the lame duck session, two of the proposals that stand out as very likely and very possible are the DREAM Act, right? Over 70% of U.S. Supports dreamers and giving them a pathway, or giving us a pathway to citizenship, and then also the Farm Worker Modernization Act, right? So making sure that there's good bipartisan support. It's supported by farm owners who need labor, and we're experiencing a labor shortage.
Lawmakers, how would you grade them? How would you grade their efforts in immigration so far?
Well, the lawmakers, we haven't, seen any significant change in immigration policy since 1986, so it's really been a long time coming.
Elena, what immigration policies would you like to see being prioritized? DACA or border security?
DACA, residency for TPS holders, the farm workers, and essential workers. We need to end up with this idea of the trade-off for some regularization at the expense of border security. We don't need more border security.
Will the blocking of Title 42 change the outlook of asylum seekers, you think?
Of course, they will now again be able to seek asylum in the United States. And I think that this is a priority. This is an international obligation that the United States has. And we have thousands of people trying to get to the U.S. to find the safety and the dignity that they can't find home. So it's very important that we put an end to Title 42.
Eddie, we've seen an influx of immigrants coming from Venezuela. We've known what the governor from Texas has been doing, sending buses and buses not only to Chicago but to New York. Do you think that's going to have a real impact in maybe not going forward with an immigration policy and immigration reform?
Well, immigrants have been arriving into the U.S. since the beginning of our, history. So it's not new that immigrants are arriving. I think the polarization, the taking people's lives and making them political is what is challenging and is what is new. But immigrants come here. It takes a little bit of time to get your, feet on the ground and start working and start making, making ends meet and being able to get into your community and know what the resources are. And with time, we anticipate that the new arrivals and new immigrants will be able to do what all of the rest of us have been able to do.
As we know, Republicans have been able to win some votes, right, with their immigration policies, even the votes of Latinos, right? We know this. Can Democrats change that in any way?
Well, I think you can look at Arizona, for instance, where there has been a huge shift in what has happened around immigration policy and what is coming out of Arizona. And a large part of that is because of Latinos. So it's a border state. used to have some of the most racist, immigration policies, and now it just put, a Democrat in the Senate, a Democrat as a governor, and the voters passed Proposition 308, which is going to allow Dreamers now to have in-state tuition for the first time ever in Arizona, and that's because of Latino voters.
Right. Let's talk about Dreamers. Can we remind our audience what the DACA program is, and what do you see happening for DACA recipients also in the near term?
The DACA program was a program established by the Obama administration that allowed individuals that had come to the United States as children and were younger than 29 years of age to have the possibility of remaining in the country, having a working authorization, and would not be deported. And that has enabled like 2 generations of young people to go to college, in some cases to have access to tuition, in-state tuition fees, and they have made their lives here. Many Dreamers are now parents of U.S. citizens. And so the expectation is that a legislative path is created so that they can have permanent residence. These are individuals that have grown up in the United States. They feel United States citizens, even though in paper they are not. And that's the challenge. We need to create a path for them.
Same question, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Dreamer myself, and I have DACA. I've had DACA since 2012 when it first came out, and it allowed me to build a career. It allowed me to buy my first home, buy an investment property. My parents have their businesses, and I help them. It is a path for us to start kind of establishing a more permanent life in the U.S., but we really need a permanent solution, and we need the DREAM Act.
Right, definitely. Elena, you were mentioning border security, that we don't need more border security. You see this as being an ongoing, we know this has been an ongoing concern from voters. How might that impact immigration reform?
Well, as I said before, for a long time there has been this idea of some concessions at the expense of more resources for border enforcement. That is not helping anyone. We don't need more resources in terms of border enforcement. Those resources could be invested, for instance, in ensuring legal representation for all asylum seekers. That would ensure faster asylum procedures, and that is in the interest of everyone. We have to really end with this paradigm that we need more border security. Right. The Republicans have been very successful in establishing that as part of the narrative, and it's the fear that is unfounded that we have.
We have heard also the lack of immigration judges to process, all the asylum seekers. How would you see that being resolved?
Instead of spending more resources in border enforcement or in any resources on the wall, let's devote those resources for more immigration judges. Those are the type of trade-offs and policy decisions that we need lawmakers to make.
Eddie, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely what we've been seeing is the backlog at USCIS. So it's not even just cases that are going before the court, but there's also backlog in asylum cases, in deportation cases, in adjustment of status cases. And so we need more judges, we need more USCIS to get clear their backlogs, and we need a streamlined process for asylum. We wouldn't need as many attorneys, right, if we had a much more streamlined process that was easy and accessible for folks to be able to apply for asylum.
Well, our thanks to Elena Olea and Eddie Rendon for joining us today. And now to Joanna Hernandez, who recently caught up with some migrants who are making Chicago their own home. Joanna?
Alex, in the midst of the battle between immigration policies, there are people caught in the middle. Asylum seekers fleeing their home countries. Thousands of migrants have arrived in Chicago from the Texas border since August. The city has been providing medical care and connecting them with shelters, but there's still a long road ahead. We spoke with mothers and grandmothers who say they are searching for better opportunities.
On a cold Chicago day, we met 2 women outside a shelter in Humboldt Park. It's the first time they've seen a glimpse of snow.
Y algo sorprendente realmente, mis hijos, bueno, no les importó jugar con esos, mojarse ni sentir el frío.
Franzuli Cañizales says she traveled through the jungle with her 2 young children. Her 10-year-old son tells us about their journey from Venezuela.
Barro, río, carrato, pasando río hondo, río llano. Pasando así con corriente, a veces uno lo llevaba, a veces no. A veces uno se iba por unas montañas con esa barrera, tú te caías y ya morías.
It's been a month since they arrived in Chicago on a bus. The mother of 4 had to leave behind 2 of her other children. Now grateful to have a roof over her head, she says she's eager to work.
Hay buenos corazones dentro de esos refugios, que es lo importante, ¿sí me entiende? Y pues, pero en el caso del trabajo es difícil porque uno está acostumbrado a labrar, a tener trabajo, ¿sí me entiende? A tener un trabajo, al decir yo estoy trabajando.
Cañizales owned a small ranch in Venezuela and struggled to provide for her children as the country deals with an economic crisis. She says her goal is to give her kids a shot at a better education.
Feliz porque ya voy a tener mi vida tranquila, estudiar, ser alguien en la vida cuando sea grande.
¿Qué quieres hacer?
¿Policía o futbolista?
¡Policía!
50-year-old Alicia Pantuña also made the dangerous trip. She came from Ecuador with her grandson.
Por la selva, 7 días en la selva, con hambre, picada de moscos, picada de todo, y ríos, soles.
Pantuña tells us she ran a vegetable stand in her homeland, but the violence and corruption were making it hard to survive.
Pero gracias también al gobierno porque nos da de comer y nos da un techo también, gracias, se le agradece también, pero nosotros queremos de nuestro sudor, queremos lograr las cosas, pero con nuestra alma, porque nosotros venimos con todo el alma para trabajar y ser alguien en la vida y darle un buen futuro a los niños.
At a hotel in Skokie, another group of migrants is receiving shelter. A mother of 6 who didn't want to be shown on camera shares what her 2-month journey was like.
Llegamos ahí a Tapachula, en Tapachula nos robaron, nos quitaron todo. De ahí tuvimos que buscar tren.
Yo pensaba que ya era finalmente.
Exactamente, ya pensando que ya no llegábamos ya. Buscamos el tren porque escuchamos del tren y nos montamos en el tren.
The 40-year-old mother is hoping to get a work visa soon and one day be able to reconnect with her children in Venezuela.
Me dice, mami, cuando viene te extraño, yo también le extraño, pero estamos aquí a un propósito de darle lo mejor.
¿Y qué es lo que espera en el futuro?
En el futuro, no, aquí lo que espero es comprarle su cosa, por lo menos uno viene por un futuro de su casa, de tener sus cosas en Venezuela.
Despite the struggles and uncertainty of what lies ahead, these women say they are driven by the chance of a new beginning.
Y a nuestras metas, a llegar a nuestras metas y para poder ser alguien en nuestro país. Eso es lo único que queremos, señorita. Nada más, y que sigan adelante y creer en Dios. Siempre es el único Dios el que nos va a salvar de todo esto, nada más.
The city is asking for donations of new clothing items and hygiene products. If you want to donate, we have a list of drop-off locations on our website. And we're back with more Chicago Tonight Latino Voices right after this.
Well, the midterms might be over, but Chicagoans' election season is just getting underway these days. Chicagoans are used to seeing a good number of Latinos on their ballots, but that wasn't always the case. In his book, Latinos in Chicago, Quest for a Political Voice, author Wilfredo Cruz traces the history of Latinos as they carved out a place for themselves in Chicago's rough and tumble politics. Joining us now with more is Wilfredo Cruz. I want to thank you for joining us today. Wilfredo, thank you for being here. There's a lot of...
Thank you for having me.
There's a lot of insider observation in this book. How did you go about writing it, and who are some of the folks you talked to?
Well, I interviewed about 20 politicians for the book. A lot of people who are still past politicians, and a lot of current younger politicians in one office. And I've done a lot of reading, a lot of court records, a lot of peer articles. So it took a lot of research. It took me about 4 years to write the book. But it was a labor of love. I thought it was a very important book. You know, a lot has been written about African Americans and Chicago politics, and Irish and Chicago politics, but nothing's been written on Latino politics. So I thought this was the time to write this book.
Definitely.
And Latinos are now the second largest group in Chicago after whites. So it's whites, Latinos, and then African Americans.
And it comes in a time also where Latinos are gaining ground also in politics here in Chicago. The book is organized chronologically by mayoral administration, starting with Richard Daley. Why did you write it that way?
Because I wanted to show how the political machine excluded Latinos and kept them out of the political framework. And so Richard J. Daley was the master of the machine. He was for 21 years. He took the Latino vote for granted. He didn't give city jobs or city contracts to Latinos. So they were basically shut out. And then I followed with Balandic and Byrd, who kind of continued the same policies of Richard J. Daley, kind of excluding Latinos and kind of just taking their vote for granted. Jane Byrd engaged in what I call hacienda politics. She appointed the first Latino alderman, second Latino alderman, Joseph Martinez. And she thought that was going to please the community, the Puerto Rican community. They got very upset because she was picking somebody who also came from the Democratic machine. And Latinos were disillusioned with the Democratic machine. They wanted a more independent, more progressive kind of politicians to represent their communities.
Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, as we know, are the dominant ethnic Latino group here in Chicago. How did they build power within the system? Was there a turning point?
Well, the Mexican community, when Richard J. Daley was in office, they kind of reached out to him. They formed a group called Amigos for Daley. They did a lot of banquets, a lot of fundraisers. But he was giving them mostly business licenses and permits and liquor licenses. He really wasn't bringing them into the political fold. And then later on, you have a second generation of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans who were more activists, younger Chicanos who started protesting and knocking on doors and demanding representation. And that's when the political situation started changing with the second generation. Right. And then with the election of Harold Washington in 1983, that's when everything changed. That was when the Latinos first got their foot in the door. He reached out to them during the campaign. Once he got elected, he brought them into office. He gave them city jobs. He appointed a lot of Latinos to city government. And then he started campaigning for people who were running for office, like Luis Gutierrez for alderman, Jesus Garcia for alderman, Miguel del Valle for senator. So you start seeing the beginnings of political empowerment.
Actually, in that chapter, you write about Rudy Lozano and the organization, about Por un Barrio Mejor, for a better neighborhood. You write, and I'll quote, the organization fought for the rights of immigrants and laborers. Lozano realized that Mexicans were outside the circle of power, looking in. And I'm quoting here from Jesus Chuy Garcia. He says, Rudy Lozano, other community activists, and I were against getting involved in electoral politics, said former state senator Jesus Chuy Garcia. We thought it was corrupt. In 1977, we visited Springfield, Illinois, attempting to kill anti-immigration legislation. We discovered how powerless we were in electoral politics while growing in numbers. We were voiceless and voteless in city council.
Absolutely. So
Things have changed.
Right. They made the realization that politics was very progressive. You had to get involved in politics. You couldn't just use demonstrations and protests to try to get white politicians accountable. You had to get people elected. And Rudy Lozano was one of the first Latinos that actually backed Harold Washington in his election. And he ran for alderman. He lost by 17 votes. And unfortunately, he was assassinated. And that murder's never really been solved. And then after that, Jesus Garcia kind of took the mantle of Rudy Lozano and got involved in progressive politics.
Right. Speaking of, who would you say are some of the most pivotal Latinos in Chicago politics right now?
Well, Jesus Garcia just threw his hat in the ring for a mayoral election. He's a very progressive person. He has a lot of experience, 40 years. He was an alderman. He was a city councilman. He was a Cook County commissioner. And now he's a U.S. congressman. Right. So he has a lot of name recognition. I think he got into the race a little late, though. Although, yes. And I think that might had heard him. The Chicago Teachers Union was really to back him up with a lot of troops and a lot of money. But he waited too long, so they backed another candidate.
He's not the only Latino. Ray Lopez as well.
Ray Lopez, alderman. He's in the.
Is Chicago overdue for a Latino mayor?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think it's time. But as I say in the book, it's not that easy to just say I'm Latino. It's my turn. I mean, you need a voice. You need a message that's going to resonate with voters. You need a lot of money. You need deep pockets. You need over $10 million to run a good mayoral campaign. You need troops, and you need to engage in coalition politics. Chicago's 1/3 black, 1/3 white, and 1/3 Latino. You just can't depend on the Latino vote. You have to reach out to whites and blacks.
Will they have enough Latino support, though?
Yeah, I think they will. I think Latinos like Jesus Garcia. He ran around Emmanuel in 215 to a runoff. Came very close.
Very close.
And that video of the the killing of Laquan McDonough was hidden.
Right.
I think had that come out sooner, I think blacks would have voted for Jesus
Things would have
Garcia,
changed.
and we would have had our first Latino mayor.
Yeah, interesting.
But it's not that easy. As I say, there's a big Mexican community that's undocumented, that's not eligible to vote. So you have to engage in voter registration. You have to naturalization. It's not just that easy to say, well, we're 1/3 of the city, but how many eligible voters do you have?
We have less than a minute, but I want to ask about the lessons Latino politicians could learn from this book.
Well, I have a chapter, Fall from Grace, where I look at politicians of the past who got caught up in corruption and bribery and setbacks. It's kind of a shameful period. You have a new generation of more progressive politicians who call themselves Democrats and socialists and independents, and I think they've learned the lessons of the past, that you can't do that. Once you're in political office, you're like a role model. People are depending on you to deliver services, to keep the promises that you said you're going to do when you're running the campaign. So I think they learned the lessons for the first generation. I think the second generation is more progressive and more, hopefully, is going to do a lot more for the community.
Very interesting. Again, the book is Latinos in Chicago, Quest for a Political Voice. And now, our thanks to Wilfredo Cruz. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Cook County Promise Guaranteed Income Pilot is ready to take off during an enrollment event this week. Some of the more than 3,000 participants who were selected by lottery became set to receive the first monthly payment of $500 on December 15th. We heard from Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle, as well as program participants and administrators, about their hopes for the program.
This is the largest guaranteed income pilot in the country, $42 million. We will have 3,250 individuals participating over a 2-year period in the pilot program, and then we've dedicated resources to continue the program after the pilot. So this will be an ongoing initiative in Cook County government.
Give Directly has been administering cash programs around the world for over a decade. So what we've found is across the board, cash helps people meet their basic needs. It allows people to invest in their future.
And then just going to help out in the future for myself and my girls. So I'm excited about that, mainly for them. So.
How old are your daughters?
I have a 15, 11, and 7-year-old. You know, I do okay, and this is just going to make it a little bit easier, you know, so a little bit less stressful, a little less anxiety about, you know, having to support them and, you know, pay for food and everything else, and maybe a few extra fun activities, you know, here and there. So this is going to be great. Another benefit program like SNAP or something, you have all these restrictions, like you can't even buy hot meals with some of those programs, so having it direct cash, it just gives me the freedom because, you know, like say I get a flat tire or something like that, I don't have to worry about it being an appropriate expense or having to even keep track of, you know, that expense. I can just take care of whatever needs to be taken care of and, you know, go from there.
So I think we'll see lots of positive benefits just as we have elsewhere in the country. And I want to be part of the national narrative that this is a good idea.
The pilot will last 2 years, but as you heard, Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle mentioned, the county's plan is to continue the program in the future using revenue from cannabis sales. Well, the Mexican Folkloric Dance Company of Chicago was or has been around since 1982. The company features more than 46 styles of Mexican traditional dances from states like Jalisco to Veracruz and Chiapas. Joana Hernandez recently caught up with their executive director, Henry Roa. She began by asking him how the group got its start 40 years ago.
In about 1980, there were two little companies, a children's group called Nuevo y Vial and a teen adult group called Alma de Mexico. And I saw them perform separately, but then they would occasionally get together to perform together if the big performance was required, you know, 2 hours. And when I saw them perform, I said, boy, they're great. They could be a professional company. And sure enough, 2 years later, 1982, February 17th, they formed the Mexican Folkloric Dance Company of Chicago. And I've been with them ever since.
Wow. And what do you love about watching people dancing? What is it like for you when you see them perform?
It brings me back to the time when I knew nothing about Mexico. I was Americanized. My first 3 children were Americanized. But then when my 4th child came, my daughter Nicole, when my first kids were teenagers, that's when I decided to find out about my heritage. And I've been finding out so much about it now that I can actually do lectures in school.
Joanna's conversation with the Mexican folkloric dance company of Chicago, well, you can actually see it on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this. That's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Latino Voices and Black Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. On a programming note, we'll be off next weekend for Thanksgiving holiday, but you can catch Brandis Friedman and Perry Schutz Monday at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Don't forget also to tune in to Noticias Univision Chicago every weekday morning. I'll be waiting for you. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Alex Hernandez. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.